Good evening. My name is Greg Wilhelm, and I am the Director of Mason Creative Writing at George Mason University. And welcome to Poetry Night In. This program is part of our semester-long series of online virtual festival events presented by Fall for the Book. And we're glad you're able to join us this evening. Fall for the Book is George Mason's premier literary festival, started 21 years ago and totally reimagined and reinvented and amazing for this online virtual world that we're currently living in. So thank you for joining us from far and near. We have 4 amazing poets tonight, and they're all graduates of the George Mason University MFA program. So we're especially honored, and I'm especially pleased to be introducing them to you this evening. To purchase all the books by these poets this evening, all you have to do is click on the green link below to purchase from our independent book-selling partner, Bard's Alley, and you can get these books. And we're going to have a wonderful reading, and hopefully there'll be some time at the end of this evening for some questions and answers from the audience. So without any further ado, let me introduce the first of our 4 amazing poets and George Mason University MFA graduates, alumni, Lisa Ampleman. Lisa Ampleman is the author of 2 books of poetry, Romances and Full Cry, and a chapbook, I've Been Collecting This to Tell You. Her poems have appeared in journals such as Poetry, Image, Kenyon Review Online, 32 Poems, and Poetry Daily, which just happens to be produced out of George Mason University's program now. Also in Verse Daily. She's the recipient of the Hermitage Artist Retreat Fellowship, and she lives in Cincinnati, where she is the managing editor of the Cincinnati Review and poetry series editor at Acre Books. Please welcome Lisa Ampleman.
Thank you so much, Greg. It's really great to be here. Thanks to the Fall for the Book organizers. It's hard for me to believe that 19 years ago this fall, I was enjoying the beautiful vistas of Fairfax and George Mason as a first-year student in the MFA program. I'm endlessly grateful for the education I received there. I'm honored tonight too to read with Brian and Rebecca and Mark, who preceded me and whose names I'd heard and whom I wanted to meet. I've heard from booksellers there's a understanding that these online events don't sell books. So prove them wrong, show them that they are worth investing in. So Bard's Alley is there, and like Greg said, there's an easy button to push. So each of the sections of Romances engages in a different way with the idea of love or romance or the courtly love literary tradition in which the troubadour sang to an unreachable woman. I'm going to read a poem from a couple of the different sections. Each of them feature a female or female identifying maker in some way. So the first section is full of knights and troubadours and Dante and Petrarch. I'm going to open with Knight Errant, which is a sort of invocation to the reader. The speaker of this poem asks to be listened to. And at the end of the poem, there's a phrase called "Be Madam." I'm imagining that as a parallel process to knighting, but for women, "Be Madam." There's also a line of Latin from the other kind of song from the 13th century, the Dies Irae, or the Day of Wrath. So this is Knight Errant. Call me Knight Error, evening trawler with a quest and a question. I have undergone 6 ordeals, clad in chainmail and spandex, scaled tenement walls to find a beehive between bricks, Apis mellifera, tremble dancing to distribute nectar, and smoked them out. Made it snow in late August, dusting the old granny zinnias. Hauled off the harbor rocks so speedboats had safe passage. Oh, my frail craft, yawing in the combers. Lay down on a mattress teeming with bedbugs and lice and plucked single hairs from my scalp for 5 hours. Ate the red chilies drying on the neighbor's wooden garden frame and pulled my friend from the brink of perilous cliff diving love, if one can ever pull another from the brink. I brought these merit badges documenting the feats to lay at your feet, oh demanding one. Dies irae, dies illa, quantus tremor est futurus. I wrote my tale out in cursive and gave an illuminator $50 to add gold leaf letter animals in the margins and sprinkle it with rosewater. Hearken, lend an ear in this crepuscular hour. I seek respite, your hand on the small of my back. Will you read? Will you bemadam me? The second poem is in the second section, which brings all of those tropes into the contemporary moment even more. It's called The Toxic Unrequited Suite. And in this poem, we hear from a member of the Troubadours, or female troubadours. We're not entirely sure if they were women or men masquerading as women, but there are troubadours in the troubadour songs that remain available to us now in manuscript. Three other facts that will help with this poem. We think now that troubadour songs sounded like plain chant. So picture Gregorian monks and what you know of that sound. A jongleur is an instrumentalist who accompanies the singer troubadour. And one of the last words in the poem, alba, is the precursor to today's aubade, a morning song or morning poem. So this is Bedtime Troubadours. I'm tempted to pull tight the floss caught between molars and pluck it like a lute. But then I could not also sing, and you deserve more than dull strumming, and would only roll your eyes. How wonderful that in plain chant, the voices hold the note, no matter how long the words take, until the next tone descends on a string from the ceiling. You can sing anything to the same tune, cowled monks in one voice, O Blessed Virgin Mary, jongleur strumming, my heart, dart shot, your archer eyes, plunk, plunk, it doesn't matter. You've gone to bed early. The hallway light besmearing your face is no sun, and this is no alba. The third section started as a joke. When I would tell people that I was studying the courtly love tradition for my doctoral exams, I had to enunciate, or people of a certain generation heard Courtney Love, the 1990s grunge rock goddess and widow of Kurt Cobain, whom she mourns in some of the poems. So after my exams, I joked I should write a sonnet sequence for Courtney Love. And then I thought, maybe I'll try that. So it takes a multifaceted look at her, sometimes through that lens of the courtly tradition, sometimes with other speakers. So the poem that I'm going to read from that section, it's called First Sight, and it includes language from the Renaissance Petrarchan sonnet tradition, Sir Thomas Wyatt and Sir Philip Sidney. And this is a description of when she first met Kurt, and he was not interested at first. It's called First Sight. You were a wraith on stage. Love's archer strung his bow and socked me in the chest, handcuffed me to the cage that would be my home. Whoso lists to hunt, I know a worthy prey. You, your ice blue eyes, bee wine voice, honey hair. But I was senseless, my sunburned brain as useless as underwear. Still, fainting I followed. I asked to see you again. You said yes, then didn't show. I offered you a flask of whiskey, a needle, I'm sorry, myself, again. You spurned me, your arms long and small, persistent, I committed to the free fall. All right, and then for my final poem, I'm gonna jump to the final section, which is more personal and looks more at romance from a different angle, a more mutual approach to love. This poem starts with a different kind of romance. The story's end. The Harlequins I read in my 20s, seethed with heat, but folded closed with a lace-gloved wedding and gaudy honeymoon balcony sunset. Honey, we're growing older in the unimagined afterward. Your bones mend slowly or not at all, pinky splinted for weeks, elbows slinged from a slick February. Nothing the doctors can do but put them in the posture of healing. And I'm tired, my blood less red than it should be, my stomach divoted where the drain was sewn in, navel rebuilt twice after laparoscopies. In the sentimental ending to our story, the one divined from tea leaves, we expire simultaneously in sleep, our bodies transforming into bees that scatter for a new hive, neither of us left alone to pay the other's crematorium bill. In medieval tales, the lover's mortal remains drift off toward the watery horizon on a skiff, or blossom into honeysuckle twined with hazel. In those romances, the story varies infinitely, but I fear our final pages are more prosaic, living wills and insurance policies. In the meantime, we'll both spit cherry pits into the same bowl. We'll watch romantic comedies and go to bed at 10. As I fall asleep, I'll imagine one possible variant ending. In our shared afterlife, you ride a Harley, your bucket list steed, into the great western hinterlands. I write in a scented lakeside garden while you're gone, ready with the saga's next installment, when your motorcycle rumbles back down the drive. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lisa. And thanks for riffing on that Courtney Love misheard. It was a great poem. Our next reader is Brian Barker. Brian Barker is the author of 3 books of poetry, Vanishing Acts, The Black Ocean, and The Animal Gospels. His poems have appeared in such journals as Poetry, the Gettysburg Review, American Poetry Review, Tri-Quarterly, the Washington Post, Indiana Review, the Cincinnati Review, and Blackbird and Pleiades. He teaches at the University of Colorado in Denver, where he is the poetry editor of Copper Nickel. Brian?
Thank you so much, Greg. I'm imagining all your faces out there, all your smiling faces. I'm sorry we can't be together in person, but I'm glad that we're here together floating through cyberspace. And thanks to the Fall for the Book Festival folks for inviting me to be here and for all the hard work they've done to make this event happen. And it's just a pleasure to read with Lisa and Rebecca and Mark. I'm going to be reading mainly from Vanishing Acts, is my most recent book of poems. It's prose poem. They're prose poems, and the first poems I'm going to be reading are from a sequence in the middle of the book that has to do with animals. They're called recreation myths, and so the idea, the premise of the poems is that they take place in some future where these animals have gone extinct. The first one is called Sea Anemones. Sea anemones. They will be without language like the stone. Their neon tentacles will be like hippopotamuses dreaming of hair. They will shit where they eat and remind us that nature is a beautiful stomach. Desire will be refracted through them as if through a prism. Any which way you turn them, they will be an open mouth. When the oceans rise, they will grow tongues and laugh at the darkness. They will climb toward heaven on their one foot. They will be puppets without eyes, miming directions for the drowned. This next one is called Bats. Bats. They will crawl out of the ashes of cold barbecue pits. Their wings will be cut from the backs of chimney sweeps. They will hang from the antlers of an elk like a congress of drowsy trapeze artists. At dusk above houses, they will appear and disappear and appear, weaving a jagged cotillion through the trees. Their songs will travel before them like aneurysms on strings, shattering streetlights, car alarms, nerves. When winter comes too early, we will see their faces in our frostbitten fruit. Insomniac, they will be your alphabet at the window. Sleeper, they will be the jewelry of your death, tangled in silk pajamas in a wet beehive of hair. One more of these critter poems. This one's called Slugs. They will be slow, gelatinous bullets, cutting forest into lace. Between wars, they will climb down and suckle the tear ducts of the dead. When they copulate on cellar walls, their bodies will be like two poles of a battery frothing corrosion. After monsoons, they will be soft scholars scrawling iridescent notes on sidewalks and doors. They will gather at night to mob the plate glass window of a butcher shop. There they will draft a brief treatise on murder above the severed head of a pig. The next morning, no one will notice it glistening in the sun. This next poem is if I were to describe this next poem, I guess I would say it's a mob violence ghost story poem. And I really feel like I have a corner on the poetry market for mob violence ghost story poems. This is the only one I know. So it's called Afterlife. The fish thief was just a harmless orphan, we realized too late, after the mob had harpooned him through the back. For nights, he wandered the foggy streets of our seaside town, crying, until Madame X lured him in through the side door of the brothel. There, she whispered, guiding him to the table, to a plate of Madelines, a glass of milk. Her rat terrier circled, whimpering, then plopped down to chew the frayed end of the long rope the dead boy dragged behind him. All night he sat there, and all night from the parlor we took turns standing on a chair to spy on him through the transom. Occasionally he tilted his head, deciphering the sea's susurrations that lapped the kitchen curtains. We hoped by dawn he'd be gone. We could see the barbed blade that exited where his heart had been. It jutted before him into the cold candlelight, cold and gleaming, pointing the way from here to there. This is my last poem. Thanks again for coming out. This is the last poem in the book. And I would describe this one as a little post-apocalyptic dystopian ditty. It's called Field Recording. We knelt at the edge of the sinkhole and lowered the microphone down into the depths. Lewis fiddled with the dials on the reel-to-reel and pressed the headphones against one ear. We could smell the fires burning in the mountains as the long shadows of dusk climbed down from the trees and rooftops. No one switched on any lights in the houses. No one parted the curtains to peek out at us in the field. Later that night, we hauled up the microphone and played back the tape. We heard the drone of bees, laughter, a train shoveling in the distance. We heard a woman talking to her dog about a soap opera and a large group of people singing happy birthday in French. We heard an old man praying to his dead wife. We heard a hailstorm pelting a cornfield and pigeons jostling in the rafters of an empty church. We heard a line of tanks advancing. We heard a roar rising in ecstatic waves from the bowl of a stadium. We heard a boy begging his papa to buy him a horse. When the tape clicked off, we drifted backwards through the silence that grew cleaner and colder by the second, like snow falling steadily all night, filling an empty swimming pool. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Brian. Brian was reading mainly from his book, Vanishing Acts, and all the books from tonight's poets are available from our book selling partner, Bard's Alley, an independent outside of Washington, D.C. And you can get these books just by clicking on the green button below, and please do that. It's important that we support the independent booksellers who support these readings through the sales of the books. Our next poet up is Rebecca Dunham. Rebecca Dunham is the author of Cold Pastoral and 3 previous collections of poems, including Glass Harmonica, winner of the 2013 Lindquist and Venom Prize for Poetry, and The Miniature Room, winner of the T.S. Eliot Prize. Her poems have appeared in or are forthcoming from the Southern Review, Prairie Schooner, Kenyon Review, and others. She earned a PhD in English from the University of Missouri and is currently professor of English at the University of Wisconsin in Milwaukee. Please welcome Rebecca Dunham.
Hi, everyone. It's great to be here, and it's great to be reading with fellow George Mason graduates. I feel like I'm always telling people how I just can't even imagine, I don't know, what would have happened with my writing if I hadn't had the opportunity to go to George Mason and work with everybody there. I'm going to start by reading a poem from my newest book, Strike, and it's called Anger According to Mrs. And Mrs. is a sort of recurrent character who shows up throughout the book. And a lot of the book deals with marriage. Marriage is an institution and a role. And so she gets to have her say occasionally. It opens with a quote by Anne Carson. As if anger could be a kind of vocation for some women, it is a chilly thought. Anger, according to Mrs. Before anger was copper wire, sparked a furious halo of heat and electricity, everything laid to waste. Ponds boiled, the charred trout, trees and grass blacked out. Before, my anger was an acetylene torch. Before, I was a girl and anger was a tantrum and I was brush fire gorging myself and it was the blooded palm applied to both my cheeks. Before, like a spire, the direction of anger burned up. Now I could hit this note 1,000 times and still it wouldn't be enough. It is never enough. Now, anger doesn't catch and flower, but presses down and in, cold density of platinum on skin. Now anger is armor, is 2 smelted plates harnessed to my frame. Now ice burns quite as well as any matchbook flame. Now anger splits field and sky like a sea of spade black ships, and this anger never forgets. And I'm gonna now read a few poems from the collection that I wrote, Cold Pastoral, which, sorry, I don't think I actually turned it around, which is dealing, sort of the spine of the book deals with the British petroleum oil spill in the Gulf, although it goes off into other directions as well. The poems I'm going to read tonight deal with that. As I was working on it, you know, all of these environmental disasters come up. And at one point I was just like, this is the everything sucks book. And so at some point I just had to be like, okay, I'm just going to focus on some of these. So I'm going to read some of the oil spill poems to start with. The first one I want to read is called Elegy Sung in Dirt. And this is after the New York Times image of the Deepwater Horizon rig when it first was collapsing. And when I first saw it in the papers, well, and on screen, as I was reading on screen, I was just struck by how beautiful it was, even though it was so horrible. So, Elegy Sung in Dirt. Feather-veined, the smoke flows up, black-blooded as the oil plumes that will soon unwind below. Boats spray forth arcs of salted water, suspended by the camera's shutter. Before evening, this image, viral elegy, will echo across screen and page. I cannot look. No, I am the poet of the eye filled with dirt, mouth shut. But tell me, who among you could conjure the gift at such depths of seeing in the dark? So as I worked on this, collection, I ended up actually going to Louisiana and talking with people. I went after the spill had happened like 9 months beforehand to a year. So I was there a couple times, and I brought a camera with me because I had been thinking this would be some multimedia project maybe at some point. And I found how important the camera was as I was talking to people. I guess I felt kind of bad at some point. So I was like, well, I'm not a journalist, I'm a poet. But so the first poem I'm going to read that sort of talks about that is in 3 parts. And it records a interaction I had with a man named Wilbert Collins, who had he had worked these oyster beds, and they were like ones that his oysters were the best oysters, basically. Okay, so field note, 2011. I raised my camera, spinning its iris. Focus shuddered and caught. Not a glyph hollowed out, but a voice written in light. Collins Oyster Company, out of business after 90 years because of BP's oil and Governor Jindal's fresh water. Sweat darkens my shirt, shape of a hand pressing. To my right, Route 1's traffic hurtles past. 90 years, a man shouts and idles his car, points to the sign. My father's out back, go talk to him. 2. The fresh water was as bad as the oil, Collins says of attempts to force oil from the marshes. His dining room turned war room, 3 card tables pushed together and a wall papered floor to ceiling in maps. Jefferson Parish's oyster lease lines, the Collins beds, thumbtacked red. Report, more than 60% of oysters in one Louisiana bay are dead as a result of the release of fresh water. He will reseed the beds this year. In 15 more, maybe the oysters will be back. I nod, pivoting, then stop. Opposite the charts hangs a photo, pre-spill. Collins on the Broad and Tragy's deck, head tipped to the sky. A typical haul, he tells me. I zoom in, filling the viewfinder. That day's dredge of mollusks, I never imagined so many, heaped in piles higher than his knees. And then I'm going to end on this last section of that poem. He poses for me, now empty deck behind him, arm braced on a stanchion. Both eyes sink into his cap's angled shadows. At his feet, the split shells of last year opalesce, a hollowed light. I don't have anything else to do, he says when I thank him. I offered to show them all my dead oysters. They don't want to see it. I know, it's not in our nature. I owe him more than this utterance unheard, must learn at last to look. Thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca, and thank you for sharing new work from Strike. We look forward to seeing more of that book soon. Before I introduce our last reader for this evening, I want to invite the audience to, if they desire, to send us any questions for any of the poets, or any questions about poetry in general that we might be able to offer up some response to. So you can do that right there on your chat in the crowdcast. Our last reader for this evening, also a George Mason MFA graduate, is Mark Fitzgerald. Mark is the author of 2 books of poetry, Downburst and By Way of Dust and Rain. His work has appeared in various periodicals, including the Santa Clara Review, Slipstream, Crab Creek Review, and Beltway Poetry Quarterly. Mark has studied in Strasbourg, France, and was awarded a fellowship to pursue his writing in Oxford. He teaches writing and literature at the University of Maryland, and was recently awarded a writing fellowship from the Virginia Center for the Creative Arts. So congratulations on that. Ladies and gentlemen, Mark Fitzgerald.
Great, thanks, Greg. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks so much for the organizers of this event. Susie, Carrie, really appreciate it. And Thanks to all of you for attending this poetry evening. It's a pleasure to read with Lisa, Brian, and Rebecca. Really enjoyed your poems. And tonight I'm going to read from Downburst. It's someone said this was like a 1970s cover, but I kind of like it. I don't know, but published recently by Cinnamon Press. A lot of the poems in this book are about everyday kind of occurrences, trying to find, some kind of inspiration or even magic in the ordinary. First poem I'm going to read is called When You're Not Looking. The turn will come driving home late from work on a Thursday, the weight of the week behind you. In the shower, the park, at a concert. The turn will come over tea when you've all but given up. Anywhere but at the cemetery where you've prayed for it to come. And when it does, you'll see yourself from miles above. All the yellow leaves from the ginkgo drop at once, a bare awakening. Life and death nipping and tugging at the same wild heart. While you lost your way over hills after the first frost and came back to the meadow as falcons dazzled the morning air. This second poem, I could have written almost in COVID, but I didn't. But when I look back at this, I think of where we're at now. It's called Reassurances. Almost dusk in a quiet house, and what have you done all day? But gaze out the window, pondering the pendulum of loss and gain. Why the unstruck bell doesn't matter anymore. More means less today, despite desire of the white cat moseying through the backyard. To die a little, to live a little more than yesterday. Who can tell the difference? Grasp the incantation of bees. You parse chance and choice, arriving nowhere. The light decreases, rushes inward. You admire the half-finished porch in the distance, the work suspended, the job ahead. The cat hears something in the shrubbery, freezes mid-stride with one paw in the air. That's when you pick up the phone, call a friend, say it's been too long. I'm going to read two more poems. This next poem is really coincides with the title of the book, Downburst, which is about, hard, fast rain falling down, bigger storms. And this one's called Disruption. And it was inspired by actually an article in the New Yorker. I think it was a talk piece that was talking about how fast this rain came down in Central Park. But then I worked on a little more and found some connections to a local walk I took in winter. So it's called Disruption. Fallen pines, remnants of a young forest. A violent storm decades ago brought them down, and eventually their death brought life to oaks, brought hickories. Sometimes fortitude is a necessary design. How beeches manage to keep their leaves through bitter months. Sometimes I can see the whole wreath shaking, wrapped in the dance of holding on, in the crazed sway let go, spinning, twisting, not letting go until a proud gold moon announces the next order. In its cracked bark stillness, winter commands the spring of every season. In the forest surrounding the marshes, it is cold but bearable. for frogs burrowed below frost lines. Survival is not much different than living. Walking along frost-covered boards above wetlands, I try to imagine the end of humankind, a swift falling. But from what forces? What creatures would we in the end give way to? A red-shouldered hawk sweeps through cordgrass, scaring off a flock of starlings. The most dramatic renewals rise from disruption. It is a pattern and a cycle of patterns, as natural as bubbles trapped below ice. This last poem is called Afterglow, about the end of summer. Trying to hold on to summer. Someone once said, summer's really only a couple of weeks. Why is everyone so sad it ends? But I don't know. I was thinking about that, I guess, when I wrote this. Summer is ending for miles on water, departing with the late sun on the docks, sinking like a whisper into a green-blue bay. In the lingering light, a small boat bumps against the pier, reminding me of a song I used to play over and over. As much as the lyrics, it was the mood that mattered. A bare melancholy, a dressed-up nostalgia. Pacing back and forth in the half-dark, I heard it differently each time. Summer was ending then too, and I didn't want to go back to school. Now the same song glows in the dark brows of fishermen and what they caught and let go. Wordless by the bay, I savor it in oysters and vinegar. Summer is ending as a small boat bumps softly. The mood still matters. What's made plain in near darkness, what shines in a black, cloudless sky. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark, and thank you, everyone. The incantation of bees. That was a great line. It's still ringing in my ears. You also mentioned, Mark, about how I believe it was that poem or another poem you said it could have been written about COVID or during COVID. So
Yes.
that leads me to a question about how the last 7 months living in these circumstances, how has that affected each of your, frankly, production and sort of like your content and your thinking about what you're writing about? So Lisa, well, let's start with you.
Sure. So in the beginning, I was just trying to get through each day. I have a 5-year-old, and my husband and I were both trying to work at home and make sure he was occupied. And then just before that, I'd started reading about space and space flight. I'd read about the Apollo missions, and I was like, oh, I want to read what comes next. So I had all these books on the space station at home. So as an escape, I've been reading about space and space flight and writing about it in different ways. And I don't have a background in science. I don't know why I've gone in this direction, but it's been a fortuitous synchronicity that I saw them interview astronauts to be like, okay, people are stuck at home. You've been stuck on the space station. Give them advice. But again, I think for me it was just escape, like thinking about being somewhere else, somewhere vast, somewhere different. So I've been strangely productive in the last part of this.
Thank you. Brian, how's the last few months impacted your life as an artist?
Totally jealous that you've been productive, Lisa, because I've not been productive at all. I've maybe written like 2 poems in the last 7 months, and I don't know. I've been creative in other ways. I do some art on the side, and I've also been obsessively doing erasure poems and kind of creating these little fragments and aphorisms out of some 19th century texts. But I have not had the headspace to be able to write. I'm just way too distracted and too close to the moment, I think, for me and history to kind of figure out how to write about it. And so I'm okay with that. we'll see. I'm sure the poems will come back at some point.
And Rebecca, I'm not sure if Strike is the newest piece of work that you or any of your colleagues have worked on most recently in this conversation, but I wonder if the current situation has impacted that latest work of yours.
Well, in terms of, I was working on a documentary project when dealing with trafficking and stuff in Milwaukee, where I live near there. And so that just came to a halt pretty much because you couldn't like go anywhere. But I've also been, at the same time, I'm home with my daughter. And so she's doing virtual school full time. Actually, our house is insane because we're all here all the time. And I've realized, you know, I'm really productive in coffee shops, but like not at home. I don't know quite what the difference is there, but with people around, I just can't focus very well. But seeing the work that my daughter's been doing, she was reading like Peter Pan, and then I just realized what a bizarre story Peter Pan is. And so I've been working on sort of this project, repurposing Peter Pan and thinking about that. And I don't know, ideas are sort of starting to come together, but it took me until this fall, I think, to even start reaching that point.
Yeah, I don't know if people can tell, but I'm flanked by a Legos table and a green puzzle board that spins around. So I often have a 10 and 8-year-old here, like angels on my shoulder, which aren't the same thing as muses. And Mark, how are you coping and creating through this time?
Well, I sympathize with Brian. I mean, I've gone through several lifetimes, but I think that at first the mindset was, you have all this time, but then you waste that time, you know, because you have so much time. But I got a black lab and started discovering some new trails around our house, and I don't know, it gets you outdoors more. I've tried to kind of, I mean, in a different way, it's helped me kind of appreciate, I think, the possibilities of just walking and through woods, and I never would have discovered these trails without this new dog. So I'm thankful for that. It hasn't translated yet into writing, but I'm getting there.
So one of the books that I published as a publisher in a past life was titled "It Can Be Solved by Walking," and it's sort of an urban exploration of slowing down and observing urban places where you kind of zoom through. And I encourage you on your walking expeditions. That's great. Yeah. One of the questions in a similar vein from the audience is, given that we live in a world of such tremendous injustice and tumult, what is the role of poetics in affecting material and immaterial, but no less consequential, change? So let's start in alphabetical order again. Lisa, sort of the role of poetics in affecting material and immaterial change.
Okay. I will say I wrote the poems in the book Romances from mostly 2012 to 2014. And I grew up in Florissant, Missouri, just next door to Ferguson. And so I'd written most of these poems before that. And I feel like I might have written a different book if it had happened differently. So I feel like now the poetry and the poetics that I'm drawn to are working for justice. They are challenging norms. I feel like as a white cis person that I needed to be listening and taking part in the conversation and writing when it makes sense, but not taking the place of someone who would have a more important story to tell. So I feel like, it can do a lot of work. Poetry, for me, when I teach poetry, which I haven't done for quite a while, what I try to emphasize is, yes, we need to have some time to analyze and to look at the way the craft is working. But in the end, for me, poetry is what makes me feel. And so the work of justice that poetry can do is making us feel things and thus hopefully acting on those feelings.
Thank you. Brian, do you have a response to that? It's a pretty big question.
It's a big question. I mean, I feel like poetry can change individuals, and individuals can make the bigger changes. You know, I think that one of the things that poetry does is that it defamiliarizes the familiar. It helps us to kind of, you know, shake us from the sleepwalk of our lives in some ways and help us to see things in some sort of new light. And I think in that way, it can really change a reader, change a listener. In general, I mean, I don't know if this is part of the question. I think that poets have to be completely free. I think that we need everything in poetry. We need poems that are taking up large social justice issues, and we need poems that are about death and poems that are about love. So I don't think that there's a call for every poet to become a social justice poet. I think you have to do what it is that you're put here to do and to write the poems that you're put here to write. So I do think it can bring about change, but I think it's through the individual and not in some sort of large scale way.
Yeah, I can't help but notice that you're all affiliated with academic institutions of some sort in some degree. So if you wanted to also, Rebecca and or Mark, if you wanted to fold in as part of your answer to this question, sir, your role as educators in very influential, you know, in I won't say places of influence, but encountering young people, when people of diversity in a very an important stage, regardless of their stage in life, being in an education environment is an important stage of your life. So how do you fold that into your answer to that question?
Should I? Okay, well, you just made the question even bigger now.
Yeah, sorry.
No, that's good. I mean, it is something I think about all the time. And I teach I feel like the students in Milwaukee that I teach are really passionate about social justice in general, from like undergrads all the way through the doctoral students. And there's so many books to be reading right now that are so excellent and so important. I just taught the new book by Terrence Hayes and by Traci K. Smith and Michael Torres, and they're all just like amazing collections. So I think that's important, and those conversations are important in the classroom. I have a friend who told me this story, and this is sort of when I start doubting the ability for literature to have any sort of social impact, I try and think about this because it's got like a small degree of like science to it, right? So he was asked, they were doing a study, a university was doing a study about if literature could change minds. And so he was asked to write a story that was climate adjacent. So it was about climate change in particular. And they were gathering like short pieces of literature. And he wrote a story that was really depressing, so I didn't get to go in. But he was updated with the results afterwards because he had participated, and it had a huge effect. They asked people before they read the work, you know, what their feelings were about the environment and climate change. They read stuff, and when they talked to them afterwards, it was really significant results. And I guess I feel like that's instinctively what I know to be true. And so it's nice to like hear that it was in some ways quantified. So I guess I do think that if you can get, you know, literature to people, it can make a difference.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Mark? Yeah.
Yes, at UMD, we're trying to do that more and more, a lot through reading and just being exposed to writers who have been able to, you know, have poems that are, you know, addressing hard issues. I don't know, I'm a big fan of Robert Haas, and his work comes through in a lot of ways that way. But also I think it's through willing to risk something in workshops and willing to talk about things that may be a bit uncomfortable. But I think that if there's space for that in art, everyone can do it their own way. And you know, someone once told me, in a workshop, you know, there's too much judgment in this poem. And I always think of, I'm always wary of judgment in poems, or thinking about poems that tend to know too much. But at the same time, I think poetics can get there in a very powerful way without directly, you know, pointing any fingers. Just this is what it is. You know, this is where we're at. This is what it is and what it has meant to be alive.
Well, thank you, Mark. That was wonderful, and a wonderful note to end this evening's event on. Make sure that you purchase copies of the books from our 4 guests this evening by clicking on the link below to Bard's Alley, who can fulfill your orders for these books. It's very important that you do so, and thank you for doing so. Join me in thanking our poets, who are all graduates of the George Mason University MFA program. Lisa Ampleman, Brian Barker, Rebecca Dunham, and Mark Fitzgerald. Thank you so much. My name is Greg Wilhelm. I'm the director of the Mason Creative Writing Program and also associate, or rather vice chair of Fall for the Book. And I want to thank Fall for the Book for all the great work they've done this evening and throughout the semester to bring you quality literary events like this. Have a good evening, everybody.